Hey everyone. So let's talk about Singapore's data protection law, the PDPA. We all kind of assume it's there to protect our personal information, right? It gives us the right to see what data companies have on us, but what happens when that system just doesn't work when you need it most? We're going to dive into a pretty wild case that really puts this whole thing under a microscope.
So picture this. You ask for your own personal data, maybe some CCTV footage. It's your right, totally legal. But while you're waiting for them to get back to you, poof, the data gets deleted. Just gone. So what happens then? Does the law still have your back? That's the big question we're looking at.
All right, first things first, the basics. There's this thing called the right of access in the PDPA. It's in Section 21, and honestly, it's the bedrock of the whole law. It's the promise, right? The promise that you are in control of your data. You should be able to go to any company and say, hey, what do you have on me? And they have to tell you. It's supposed to be a really powerful tool for us.
But how well does that promise actually hold up in the real world? Let's get into a specific case study, a real story. We're going to follow a citizen who tried to do exactly that, use their right to get a hold of some CCTV footage of themselves. This isn't just theory. This is what happened when the rubber hit the road.
Okay, the timeline here is, well, it's everything. Pay close attention to these dates. So, April 17th, a citizen makes a verbal request. By April 25th, it's a formal, written request. Everything's by the book. But then, just 5 days later, on April 30th, the CCTV footage is gone, permanently deleted. And get this, on May 10th, a full 10 days after the evidence was destroyed, the data regulator finally advises the citizen to go to the police. I mean, the advice wasn't just late, it was completely useless at that point.
So you're probably wondering, what did the regulator, the Personal Data Protection Commission, or PDPC, have to say about all this? Well, this is where the story takes a really bizarre turn. The logic they used for their decision, wow, it's made a lot of people question how effective this law actually is.
Now let's be clear about how this is supposed to work. You've got government ministers on record in Parliament assuring everyone that safeguards are in place. The message from the top is crystal clear. An organization can't just hit delete on your data while you're in the middle of asking for it. That's meant to be an offense. That's the standard we all expect. But what happened in this case uncovered just a massive loophole. It's almost like a playbook. Step 1, you ask for your data. Step 2, the organization just waits. They do nothing. Step 3, while they're waiting, their automatic routine deletion process kicks in and your data is gone. It's only after the data has vanished that they come back to you, step 4, and officially say, sorry, we can't give you the data because it doesn't exist anymore. And here's the kicker. Step 5, the regulator ruled that because the organization never formally refused the request before the data was deleted, their legal duty to hang on to it was never even switched on. It's wild.
And all of that led to this really shocking conclusion. The PDPC basically said they were unable to make a determination about a breach. Why? Because the data was already gone. Think about that. The very act of deleting the data while someone was asking for it became the perfect excuse for not getting in trouble. It's this no data, no breach logic. And that just guts the entire right of access. It completely undermines the whole point of the law for every single one of us.
So this wasn't just about one weird loophole in one case. No, this whole thing really ripped the curtain back and exposed some potentially huge systemic problems with how our data protection laws are being understood and enforced.
Check out this contradiction. The PDPC, the regulator, they have their own public guidelines on how you're supposed to get access to CCTV footage. But in this case, they actually said that parts of their own advice were, quote, inconsistent with the PDPA. Okay, so when they were asked, hey, could you please tell us which parts are wrong so we all know the rules? They refused. How is anyone, a citizen, a company, supposed to know what to do?
And then there's that whole go to the police thing. The PDPC actually used that as a main reason to just dismiss the case. But here's the deal. Nowhere in the PDPA does it say you can deny access if you tell them to go to the police. That's not a legal exception. It's described as a practical courtesy, a courtesy that, remember, was offered 10 days after the evidence was destroyed. It really starts to feel less like helpful advice and more like a way to dodge their main job, which is to enforce the data protection law.
So what happens if you think the regulator itself messed up? Who do you complain to? Well, a complaint about the PDPC goes up the chain to the IMDA. Sounds reasonable, but here's the problem. The CEO of the IMDA is also the head of the PDPC, so the person in charge is essentially overseeing themselves. It's been called circular oversight, and it raises a really big question. Where's the independent accountability?
And how effective is that oversight? Well, in this case, it took 7 months. 7 months for the IMDA to even formally address the complaint about how the PDPC handled things. And that only happened because another government agency had to step in. That doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
Okay, so after digging through all that, what now? Where do we go from here? The good news is the problems this case brought to light haven't just disappeared. They've been escalated, and now there are some really pointed questions being asked.
And these questions are being taken all the way to Parliament. Things like, are we going to close that pre-refusal loophole for good? Are we going to make it absolutely clear that you can't just destroy data mid-request and use that as an excuse? And really importantly, will there be a truly independent body to review complaints against the PDPC? I mean, these are the core questions that will decide if our data law has any real teeth.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The law, it promises us protection. It promises us rights over our own data. But this case really seems to show a huge gap between the promise on paper and the reality on the ground. It shows how tricky interpretations and procedural sidesteps can basically erase the rights we thought we had. So the big question we're left with isn't just about what the law says. It's about whether the very people meant to guard that law are making sure its promise is kept. For you, for me, for everyone.